am your host, G.I. Wingnut. Welcome back to the channel. We are continuing with Atlantis and Lemuria by Rudolph Steiner, penned in 1911. We've made it up to chapter 6. So let's see where chapter 6 takes us. And that's humanity before the division of sex. Although the form of man in those ancient times, which have been already described, was very different from his present form, yet, if we were to go still further back in the history of humanity, we find conditions differing even much more widely. For it was only the course of time that the forms of man and woman arose from an earlier, original form in which the human being was neither one nor the other, but both at the same time. He would gain himself a conception of those primordial ages, must free himself entirely from those customary ideas which are drawn from present conditions. Oh, is this why there's that narrative of about gender and its original, but both at the same time? He who would gain himself a conception of those primordial ages must free himself entirely from those contemporary ideas which are drawn from the present conditions. In other words, I think what he's trying to say here is that we should embrace, as modern humans, or in this current form that we're in, the roots of a genderless society. Is that where the whole narrative is coming from? Asking for a friend. Moving right along. The times to which they are looking back lie somewhat before the middle of that epoch, called in the preceding extracts the Lemurian. The human body then consisted of a soft plastic matter, and the rest of the earthly forms also were both soft and plastic. Compared with its later firmness, the earth was still in a bubbling and more fluid state. Oh, wow. I'm going to have to dig into some L. Ron Hubbard stuff for you guys. Oh, boy. Anyway, moving along. The human soul, being embodied in that matter, could then adapt itself in much greater degree than later. For the clothing of the soul in a male or female body is due to the fact that one or the other is forced upon it by the development of external nature. So long as matter had not become firm, the soul could enforce its own laws upon it. It molded the body in its own likeness, but when matter had grown dense, the soul had to suit itself to the laws stamped on the matter by external nature. Oh my goodness. Oh, this is difficult to read. I hope you're finding it easier to listen to. But yeah, I'm definitely going to have to do some breakdowns on some Scientology stuff for you guys, or point you in the right direction anyway. I'll gather it up, or I will figure it out. Moving along. So long as the soul was master of matter, it formed its body neither male nor female, but gave it qualities common to both. For the soul is at once both female or male and female. It's that Chinese yin-yang concept. They've got a hybridization of stuff here. Interesting. I'm not surprised, but it's interesting. Moving on. In itself, it bears these two natures. Its male element is related to that which we call will. Its female element is to what is designated imagination. The external formation of the earth has led the body to adapt to one-sided evolution. The male body has assumed a form as determined by the element of will. The female, the contrary, bears rather the impression of imagination. Thus, it is the bisexual male-female soul inhabitants a unisex male or female body. Yeah, that's where that modern doctrine is coming from. Oh, wow. At least how it was utilized to be brought in. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the nuances of everything at the moment. Moving on. And so the body has, in the course of evolution, soul inhabit. Hang on. I got mixed up there. And so the body had, in the course of evolution, assumed so decided a form through the influence of the external earth forces that therefore it was no longer possible for the soul to pour its entire force into this body. Whew. It had to retain within itself something of the force that belonged to it and could allow only a part to flow into the body. Why do I hear Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi in this? Why? Oh wow. Moving on. When we study the Akashic record, we see that at a period in the far past, human forms appear soft, plastic, and quite unlike those of later times. They still remain in equal measure the nature of man and woman. As time passes and matter densifies, the human body appears in two forms. One which resembles the man's later form, the other the woman's. I think we've gotten there already. Somewhere like 3 or 4 paragraphs back at the very least. Anyway, moving on. Before the appearance of those differential forms, every human being could of itself bring forth another. The fruitification. The fruitification was no outer process, but which took place within the human body itself. When the body took on a male or female form, it lost the possibilities of self-fruitification. Cooperation with another being was necessary in order to produce a new human being. Okay, so... Oh, wow. Oh, wow. So you had... Oh, wow. No... If you have any comments or questions about all that, I'll go back and break it down. If you want to try to untangle that for yourself, go right ahead. But basically, I think what they're saying is you could go fornicate with yourself, but it's not going to do you any good. I don't know. I don't want to think about it too much. Anyway, wow. Moving on. The separation of the sexes appears when the earth attains a certain condition of density. The density of matter partly checks the power of reproduction, and that portion of the reproductive force which is still effective requires completion from outside by the opposite force in another human being. But the soul must retain within itself a part of its earlier force, in man as well as in woman. It cannot expend this part in the outer corporeal world. Now, this portion of his force is directed inward in man. It cannot appear outwardly. Therefore, it is set free for the use of inner organs. And here comes an important point in the evolution of mankind. Before it, that which we call mind, the ability to think, could have found no place in man, for this capacity would have had no organ through which to act. The soul turned its whole force outwards to the building up of the body. But now the soul force, which cannot find an object for its activity without, can unite itself with the mind force, and by such a union these organs of the body are evolved, which at a later period make man a thinking being. I think he's trying to explain the development of the brain, the origin of the brain. Thus could man direct a part of the force that in earlier times he had turned to the bringing forth of his kind, to the perfection of his own being. The force by means of which mankind formed itself a thinking brain is the same force by which, in ancient times, man fructified himself.
Fructify. Fructify.
Man fructified himself. So let's try that again, since we know the connotation or the definition, the context. Let's put it in context. The force by means of which mankind formed itself a thinking brain is the same force by which, in the ancient times, man fructified himself. So, made himself, well, as it says in the next sentence, thought is attained by unisexuality. Continuing, since man no longer fructifies himself, but the opposite sex fructify one another, they can turn a part of their productive force inwards and become thinking beings. Thus, the male and female bodies, respectively, represent externally an imperfect picture of the soul, but because of this, they become inwardly more perfect beings. Wow, that's some mental gymnastics. I guess maybe I'm just thinking too much in modern terms. I just don't understand. I don't get it. Maybe if they boil it down a little more simply, that might help. So continuing, very slowly and gradually this change is accomplished in man. Little by little, the later single-sexed human forms appear side by side with those of the double sex. It is again a kind of fructification which takes place in man on his becoming a thinking being. The inner organs, which can be built up by the superfluous soul force, are fructified by the mind. Oh, wow. Oh, I got to get through this. This is brutal. The soul in itself, twofold, male and female, and so in ancient times it also formed its body. Ah, oh, good grief. This reminds me of some of the first time I tried to read some Middle English stuff that had been transliterated into English, and it was brutal. It was just this brutal. Moving on. At a later period, it can only give to its body a form that can cooperate with another externally. For itself, it retains the ability to cooperate with the mind. From this time forward, man is fructified without, or from without, for the exterior part, from within and for the interior part of his nature by the mind. This is so L. Ron Hubbard. This must have been where he got it. I know L. Ron Hubbard stole a lot of different stuff and threw it in the mixing pot for to create Scientology. But again, moving on. It may be said then that the male and the female soul, the female body and a male soul. Oh, let me try that again. It may be said then that the male body has a female soul and the female body has a male soul. Let's think about that for a minute. Transgenderism, the transgender agenda. Just thinking out loud. Moving on. This inner one-sidedness in man is now balanced by the fructification of the mind. Yeah, mind effing. Anyway, wow. Moving on. The one-sidedness is removed. The male soul in the female body and the female soul in the male body both become bisexual again through fructification of the mind. Thus do man and woman differ in their outer form, and within the one-sidedness of the soul unites itself in both sexes to a harmonious whole. Within mind and soul, within mind and soul melt into unity. The mind affects as the female, the male soul in woman, and thus makes it male-female. It works upon the female soul in the man as male, and so it forms female-male. The bisexuality in man is withdrawn from the outer world where it exists in pre-Lemurian times to his inner self. Well, it sounds to me like if people want to embrace the culture of Lemuria, they need to embrace the natural bisexuality of the individual. I'm just throwing that out there from what I just read. Anyway, moving on, because I'm not sure how much further I had to go in this episode. We see that the higher inner man has nothing to do with the male and female. Nevertheless, the inner uniformity comes from a male soul in a woman, and in like manner from a female soul in a man. The union with the mind brings uniformity at last. But the fact that before the appearance of this uniformity there exists a difference, this fact contains a mystery of human nature. Yeah, that's been a long-standing argument for quite some time about nature over nurture. Moving on. The knowledge of this mystery is of great importance to all occult science, for it is the key to weighty problems of life. For the present, it is forbidden to raise further the veil that covers this mystery. Ooh, more secret knowledge. Stick around, folks. Moving on. Thus did physical man develop the bisexual body to be the unisexual, to the separation into man and woman. And because of this, man has become a being endowed with mentality such as he now is. But it must not be imagined that there were not intelligent beings in connection with the earth even before this period. If we search the Akashic records, we certainly see that in the first Lemurian period that the physical man of the future was a very different being from that which we call man today. He was unable to connect any sense perception with thoughts. He did not think. His life was one of instinct. His soul expressed itself simply in instincts, desires, animal wishes, and so on. Oh boy. Um, is that Freud or Carl Jung? I can't tell. Moving on. His consciousness was dreamy. He lived in a kind of stupor, but there were other beings in the midst of this humanity. There were, of course, these were, of course, also bisexual. For with the prevailing conditions in the evolution of the earth at that time, no male or female human body could be brought forth. The external conditions were still wanting, but there were other beings who, in spite of their double sex, were able to acquire knowledge and wisdom. This was possible because these beings had undergone an entirely different evolution at a still more remote period of the past. It had become possible for their souls to fertilize themselves with mind without waiting for the development of the inner organs of the human physical body. Wow. Okay. Moving on. It is only by the help of the brain that contemporary man is able to ponder upon these impressions which he receives from outside and through the senses. It is, hang on, I got to pause on that because distinctly right here where Rudolph makes reference to impressions, the same concept of impressions is shared in Scientology as facsimiles. It's virtually a memory, but if it's a bad one, then it sets an engram. It's a blockage that is keeping you from moving forward. Anyway, moving on. It is the evolution of the soul of man that caused this. The human soul had to wait till there was a brain to cooperate with the mind. The soul would have remained mindless had it not taken this indirect path. It would have remained at the stage of dream consciousness. Oh, I'm seeing a Navajo parallel there, I think, but I can't pinpoint it for sure. So, moving on. It was different with the superhuman beings already mentioned. The soul of such beings had at earlier stages developed soul organs, which required nothing physical to enable them to unite themselves with the mind. Their knowledge and wisdom were supersensually acquired. Such knowledge is called intuitive. Downloads from heaven. Moving on, which enables him to come into touch with mind apart from the assistance of the senses. So, contact through meditation. Moving on. He must reach it indirectly through the material senses. This indirect course is called the descent of the human soul into matter, or popularly, the fall into sin. Owing to an earlier evolution of a different kind, these superhuman beings did not need to undergo this descent into matter, as the soul of such beings had already attained a higher stage. Their consciousness was not dreamy, but inwardly luminous, and and the comprehension of knowledge and wisdom by them was clairvoyance, which needed no sense and no organs of thought. The wisdom by which the world was built streamed directly into their soul. So they were directly plugged into the source. They had a main line to the information. Sounds kind of like some of these New Apostolic Reformation types, just saying. Anyway, moving on. Thus, thus were they able to be leaders of young humanity, still sunk in apathy. They were the bearers of an ancient wisdom to comprehend which man must struggle upwards by the roundabout path described. Oh, that's interesting. A young humanity still sunk in apathy. They're not enlightened, so they can't be kind. They don't care because they're selfish, because they don't have empathy, because they haven't learned it yet. That's an interesting take. Maybe it's just my take. Anyway, moving on. They differed from what is called man by the fact that wisdom poured out in rays on them from above as a free gift, just as the sunlight beams down on us. The sevenfold rays, anyone? I'm thinking Elizabeth Clare Prophet here. It is not so with man. He had to acquire wisdom for himself by the labor of the senses and of the organ of thought. It did not at first come to him as a free gift. He must desire it. Okay, yeah, that's the key to earning your way into a secret society, to get that secret knowledge, is you desire that knowledge. Moving on. Only when the longing for wisdom is alive in man does he strive to attain it for himself through his senses and thought organ, brain. So a new impulse must awaken in the soul, desire, the longing for knowledge. Can anybody think of the Great Reawakening? Moving on. The human soul could also possess this longing in its earlier stages. Its impulses were only towards embodiment in that which took on an outer form, in which it lived as a dreamy life, but not towards the knowledge of an outer world, not towards understanding. With the separation of the sexes, first appeared the desire for knowledge. So the goldfish bowl analogy comes into play here in my mind. The idea of what is that? But not towards, there's no desire towards the knowledge of an outer world, because you're already comfortable with the little bitty goldfish bowl that you're in. So you have to get out of your comfort zone when you're released into a larger tank to realize there is more to the outer world. All right, moving on. It was just because the superhuman beings did not desire it that wisdom became known to them by the path of clairvoyance. The ascended masters, anyone? Moving on. They waited until wisdom streamed into them, as they wait for the sunshine that we cannot create by night, but which must come to us of itself in the morning. The longing for knowledge is evoked in this way, in order that the soul may build up inner organs, the brain, etc., by which it comes into possession of knowledge. So, I think what they're trying to say here is that the manifestation of our physical form was brought on by the work of our own soul desiring it. So, this, in my opinion, may be some of the older roots in that whole blab it and grab it prosperity gospel stuff. Sow those seeds for prosperity and such. Anyway. And also why certain movements, like, I don't know, as Laura calls it, the 17th letter of the English alphabet, likes to talk about that secret knowledge. Moving on. This result follows because part of the soul force works no longer from without, but from within. But the superhuman beings who have not accomplished this separation of their soul forces direct their entire soul energy outwards. I've heard of some. Moving on. They have thus also at their service for the outer fruitification by the mind, that force which man turns inward for the building up of his organs of knowledge. Now that the force by means of which man turns outwards to unite himself with another is love. So just by just by connecting with other humans in real life is an outward sign of love. Yeah, I suppose to a degree, there's more to that context. Moving on, the the superhuman beings directed their whole love outwards to let the wisdom of the worlds stream into their souls. But man can turn outward only a part. The superhuman kinds directed their whole love outwards to let the wisdom of the world stream into their souls. So that sounds to me, I had to back up and look at that again. Because that sounds to me like the Pleiadian conspiracy theories that I've been hearing, as well as the Ascended Masters, the Violet Flame. Anyway, okay, so continuing. Man became sensual, and thus his love grew sensual too. He withdrew from the outer world a part of his being, which he then directed towards his inner building, and this produced what is called selfishness. Are you just building yourself if you're being selfish? Again, I'm not buying the definition there. It's lacking context. Moving on, when man became man or woman in his physical body, he could only surrender a part of his being. With the other part, he separated himself from the surrounding world. He became selfish, and his outer activity, as well as his striving for inward development, became selfish. He loved because he desired, and he thought because, again, he desired. In this case, knowledge. In contrast to, oh, good grief. Loop-de-loop logic. Loop-de-loop logic. Anyway, moving on. In contrast to a childish and selfish humanity stood the leaders in their all-loving, unselfish natures. Really. The soul which in them inhabits neither a male nor a female body is itself male-female. It loves without desire. The innocent soul of man loved thus before the separation of the sexes. Nevertheless, it could not at that time know, for the very reason that it was still in a lower stage, in a dream consciousness. Thus, too, does the soul of the higher beings love. Nevertheless, these beings cannot know in spite of this and on account of their advanced development. Quote unquote, man must pass through selfishness in order once more to reach unselfishness at a higher stage, but this time with an absolutely clear consciousness. So it's okay to be selfish if you're aware that you're doing it as part of your personal evolution, your being evolution. Wow. Okay, I had to step back for a second and take a stretch. I think I pulled a lobe in my brain. Wow. Moving on. This, then, was the task of the superhuman beings of the great leaders, to stamp upon the young humanity their own character, that of love. They could do so only with that part of the soul force which was directed outwards. Thus arose sensual love, and hence the latter accompanies the soul's activity in a male or female body. Sensual love became the force for human development, or human physical development. This love brings man and woman together insofar as they are physical beings. On this love rests the progress of physical humanity. It was over this love only that the so-called superhuman beings had power. That part of the human soul force which turns inwards and must gain knowledge by the indirect path of sensuality withdraws itself from the power of these superhuman beings. Wow, again, I'm getting dizzy. So this is the ideology that they utilize, it seems to me, for doing that S magic. Moving on. They themselves, the superhuman beings, had never descended to the development of corresponding inner organs. So they're energy beings, basically, from what our minds can conceive. Anyway, moving on. Trying to stay away from the aliens and all that right now. Moving on. They could clothe the outer impulse in love because they possessed as their very essence the love that was inwardly active. Thus, channel your inner light. Ascend through your inner light. Oh, wow. All right. Moving on. Thus, there was a gulf between them and the young humanity. They could implant love in man, at first in a sensual form. Knowledge they could not give because their own knowledge had never taken the bypath through those inner organs, which man was now developing in himself. He could not speak. He could speak no language which a being with brains could understand. So, telepathic aliens, maybe? Thinking out loud here? Moving on. Now, the said inner organs of man were, it is true, not ripe for the contact with mind until that stage of earthly existence was reached, which lies in the middle of the Lemurian period. So it wasn't necessarily advanced technology as so many might think today. It was just a more harmonious technology with the surroundings. So anyway, now let me start that again because I broke up in the middle of the sentence. I don't want to get it out of context. So again, now the said inner organs of man were, it is true, not ripe for contact with mind until that stage of the earthly existence was reached, which lies in the middle of the Lemurian period. But once before, at a much earlier period of development, they had been cultivated into an imperfect first being. For the soul had already passed through the physical embodiments in times long gone by. It had lived not indeed on the earth, but on other celestial bodies in densified matter. Aliens, anybody? Moving on. More exact information on this subject cannot be given till later. Hang around for that hidden information, for that secret knowledge. See, they're reeling you in. Moving on. Only so much as this may now be said. The beings of Earth had formerly inhabited another planet, and according to the conditions existing on it, they had developed to a stage at which they stood when they reached the Earth. Stargate, anybody? Moving on. They laid aside the matter of the preceding planet like a garment and became pure soul germs at the stage of development reached then, capable of sensation, of feeling, and so on. In short, able to lead that dreamlike life which still belonged to them in the first stages of their earth existence. But the superhuman beings spoken of, the leaders in the domain of love, had also lived on preceding planets and were even there so perfect that they no longer needed to descend in order to develop the first beings of those inner organs. Oh, I gotta keep going. This is wild. This is so wild. Um, yeah, Ascended Masters all over this. And of course, remembering that Rudolph Steiner was an acolyte of H.P. Blavatsky, so there's that. Moving on. But there were other beings not so far advanced as those leaders of love, but who might rather be counted as men on the preceding planet, who nevertheless outstripped mankind at that time. They were thus indeed at the beginning of the earth formation, further advanced than man, but nevertheless still at a stage at which knowledge must be acquired through inner organs. These beings were in a peculiar position. Interesting. I wonder if that's like a reference to an angelic type being. Moving on. They were too far advanced to pass through the physical human body, neither male or female, and yet not far enough to be able to act by means of perfect clairvoyance, as were the leaders of love. Interesting how that got capitalized there. All of a sudden now we've got this reverent connotation. They do that with culty stuff. They being whoever's running the cult in this particular context. Moving on. They could not be, as yet, beings of love, and at the same time, they could no longer be quote unquote men. So it was only possible for them as semi superhuman beings to continue their own evolution. But with the help of man, they could converse with the beings with brains in a language these understood. So, yeah, that's the angels, so to speak, the messengers, the go betweens, the intercessors. Moving on. By these means, the human soul force directed inwards was aroused, and they were enabled to unite themselves to knowledge and wisdom. It was indeed only thus that wisdom of a human sort came to earth. They became enlightened. Moving on. The semi-superhuman beings spoken of were able to absorb human wisdom and thus reach that perfection which they themselves still lacked. They thus became the creators of human wisdom. For this reason, they are called light bringers. Lucifer. There it is. There it is. Ding, 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 ding. Moving on. Thus, had infant humanity leaders of two kinds, bringers of love and beings of wisdom. Human nature was yoked between love and wisdom when it assumed its present form on earth. By the beings of love, it was stimulated to physical development. By the beings of wisdom, to the perfection of its inner self. Uh, so beings of love, the whole hippie movement thing, right? And beings of wisdom, the whole guru types. In the consequence of the physical development, mankind advanced from generation to generation, forming new tribes and races. Through its inner development, the individuals increased in inward perfection. They became scholars, sages, artists, technical scientists, etc. From race to race, physical humanity advances. Each race, throughout its physical evolution, transfers to the following one, such of its qualities as are perceptible to the senses. Here, the law of heredity reigns. They're sneaking in the whole bloodlines matter thing there. That's not. I don't. No, moving on. The children bear the physical characteristics of their fathers. Beyond this lies an evolution towards perfection of mind and soul, which can only be accomplished by the development of the soul itself. And here we are confronted with the law of the evolution of the soul within the bounds of the earthly existence. Well, that's the end of chapter 6. So, if you made it this far into the video, kudos to you. I appreciate you sticking around. If you have not yet, please feel free to subscribe to my channel. Hit that bell so you know every time I drop a video. There's not going to be any set schedule, and it's going to get kind of random at times. But I still have that 1952 project that I'm working on. So, by all means, please share the information around. Give me a thumbs up if you like what I'm doing. And I hope you all take care of yourselves. Remember, genuine mental health matters. So it helps to know what the psyops are, what the attacks are, and what you need to put guards up against. Like G.I. Joe said, knowing is half the battle. Well, the other half of the battle, which he doesn't tell you about, is doing something about it. Everybody.